Yo, we got something to talk about, all right? We do. We have something to talk about. Everyone, if you ride a Harley Davidson, you might have heard a bit of the news that drops like January 1st of this year. It's like the end of the Super Tuner, right? The EPA basically went after our boys at HD a couple years back about maybe some, and distributing parts that don't meet EPA compliance. Now, the EPA, they like their compliance, okay? The EPA has been notorious for going after the automotive industry, but they've kind of left our boys in the motorcycle niche alone. For a while, motorcycles have always just been behind the times when it comes to the technology. I mean, we got fuel injection in like the 90s, which, I mean, I don't know, whatever. Some bikes still use carburetors, no big deal. The gang over at Harley Davidson got hit with a huge fine, and basically they're not allowed to sell any more super tuners or any performance parts that modifies or defeats emissions compliance systems. All right, so what does that mean for us? What does that mean for Harley? What does that mean for local shops? Well, we're getting into that, okay? So your local independent shop, all right, their bread and butter is probably service work, older bikes. Maybe they're into performance stuff, okay? Maybe that's their thing. Now, the problem comes in the fact that the EPA has previously, in the past, went after other industries revolving around, their laws and rules and regulations. If you're familiar with anything diesel related, you probably understand that deleting trucks is like a huge no-no anymore. We have seen in the past dudes getting slapped with hefty fines, like up to $5,000 a part, for emissions defeating components, block off plates, EGR and DEF deletes, the DPF filter deletes, all this stuff that makes a truck unreliable. They got hit with a huge fine for taking it off and making the truck reliable. That's just my opinion. As it revolves around motorcycles, we've pretty much been untouchable for years. All right, we got O2 sensors in like 2006 on Harley Davidsons. Pretty much have just been way behind the times. Everyone knows Harley Davidson's yesterday's technology with tomorrow's prices. All right, I get it. I've heard all the jokes. I've been around these my entire life, which isn't very long. Whatever, I'm rambling. Harley Davidson is not going to be allowed to sell any more aftermarket parts that don't meet EPA regulations. That's exhausts, air cleaners, tuners, you name it. If it doesn't meet EPA standards, you're not getting it at the dealership anymore. But all of us know that right now you can go to any Dodge dealership and go pick up a 700-800 horsepower, Charger that meets EPA compliance. So I'm not really worried about the performance aspect of it. I'm just worried about how far behind we are when it comes to EPA standards. You can make plenty of power and still meet their specs, but we're like typically a decade or two behind the automotive industry when it comes to our two-wheeled, modes of transportation. All of our motorcycles, even updated stuff like Yamahas and Hondas and the Japanese bikes, they're at the head of the curve most of the time. But when it comes to our American V twins, everyone knows we're lacking. So I think the main holdup or bottleneck is going to be the aftermarket. Vance & Hines is already working on EPA compliant parts. I know S&S obviously is working on EPA compliance parts. I don't even think you can get a true straight pipe or anything of that nature from S&S anymore. I know their exhausts, I think all of them for Milwaukee 8s have a cat in them. Again, not a huge problem. To be honest with you, some of these new exhausts are making more power than the old stuff that has no EPA compliance. But still, we're pretty far behind. Now, when it comes to things like big cams and dyno tuning, flash tuning, if you have an older bike, you're probably going to go to an independent shop. Now, I think this is really going to hurt a lot of independent shops, especially if their main market is aftermarket performance parts, big bore kits, cams, dyno tuning, the whole 9 yards. If that's what their bread and butter is, they're probably going to suffer. And it's sad, but they're basically forced to have two options. Option A is meet EPA compliance. Don't be doing illegal mods and throwing on, parts that don't meet EPA rules. Now, this is probably going to vary state by state. Some states are more critical than others. California, they're still going to be able to modify bikes and make more power. We just have to stick within the margins that we were placed in. And pretty much option B is say, oh, I don't care about the EPA. They're not going to know. They're not going to touch me. The main incident I want to talk about with saying, oh, they're not going to get me, is Diesel Freak LLC. $750,000 fine. $750,000 fine for scheming to delete and deleting like emissions compliance components, I believe is the verbiage that they used. And basically that scheming to delete, the more I read into it, it just seemed like they had invoices and estimates, or quotes, I guess you could say, to delete trucks. And they got hit. They made an example out of Diesel Freak. Now, is that going to happen to your local independent shop that turns wrenches and puts air cleaners on and does oil changes? Probably not, but it very well could. And me, I know at the shop I worked at and the local shops around me, I don't think any of them would be able to handle a $750,000 fine. I mean, unless you could do payment plan, but that payment plan would probably take majority of your money for the rest of your life. Kind of just not worth the risk if you start to think about it. I mean, how much do you make off a cam install? $1,500? $1,500, huge fine. I'm probably going to lose out on the $1,500 because I can make that up in a couple oil changes, few services, general preventative maintenance, tire changes, and the latter. The shop that I worked at, our bread and butter was handlebars, stereos, oil changes, tires, the general service work, and light modifications. Now, we did do some big bores. We used to have a dyno. We did a lot of tuning in like 2016, 2017. So we did a lot of that. But from a cost perspective and a turnaround objective, your services and your general maintenance and basically the stuff that the Moco doesn't want to take in, that was what kept us going. That's what kept the doors open throughout the time that I was there. That's how I made my money. So as a small independent operator, or from my perspective, a guy who used to work at an independent shop, I don't think it's worth the risk to blatantly break the EPA guidelines or whatever, the rules, whatever you want to call it, especially if that's the way that you're putting food on the table for your family and paying your bills. I wouldn't want to risk my financial stability, or my family's financial stability over throwing an exhaust on a guy's bike. All right. So where does that leave us, the owners of these bikes? Well, looks like you're probably going to have to start doing your own maintenance, but at your own risk. Not just maintenance, but all your work at your own risk. Because you could still get hit with the fine depending on how strict your state is. You personally, as the owner of that vehicle, could get, I think it's up to $5,000 per part that defies or deletes an emissions component. Now, that could be an exhaust. It could be an air cleaner. I mean, I read a story about a guy with a 6.7 Power Stroke that got charged $5,000 per part. And I mean, they broke it down to like the individual sections of the exhaust that weren't stock. You're basically running your own risk if you're going to start doing mods to your bike. However, we all know that one guy that just doesn't care. And if that's you, great. I think nobody should be allowed to tell you what you can or can't do. So that's my opinion. I don't think I really have to worry about it. I have two bikes that, my FXR probably wasn't even built when the damn EPA was, initially started, but who knows? I'd have to look that up. Anyways, moral of the story, buy a manual, read the news about emissions stuff, don't be a victim, and don't get your bike taken over, a nice exhaust or an air cleaner or a big cam. All right. Anyway, ride safe, ride smart. And if you want to learn how to put your own handlebars on, click this video right here. And if you want to learn how to do your own oil change, click this video right here.